Hey everybody, in this video I'm going to be reviewing an inflatable paddleboard, my very first ever inflatable paddleboard, and this one was sent to me by Goosehill. It is their Rainbow R Passion inflatable paddleboard. This one is 10 foot 6 inches long and it goes for $400 currently on their website. I'll put a link to that down in the video description below. So I was pretty excited to get my hands on this because I've never owned an inflatable paddleboard or even used one. I've just had one of these solid, rigid plastic ones that are bulky, definitely not as easy to carry, and harder to transport. I need a truck whenever I want to bring it somewhere, or a vehicle with a roof rack. So this will be pretty cool, a paddleboard that I can bring somewhere with my car. Definitely be careful opening the box if you use a knife like I did, because obviously if you just kind of stab into the box, there's a good chance you're just going to end up piercing the paddleboard. So a couple things come with this package. The first thing that you're going to get with it is these little repair patches in case you do manage to somehow pierce the paddleboard. Next up is this large black carrying case. This is going to be what you put your paddleboard in when not in use, because you can fold up this paddleboard for easy transport, and this does have straps on it like a backpack as well as a handle. I have right here the fin for the very bottom of the paddleboard. This is detachable. I have the little wristband or ankle band that you'd attach to yourself so that if you fall off of it, your paddleboard is still with you. A manual pump here with the tube. This here looks to be a little watertight container that I believe is just intended to hold the contents of the repair kit, the glue and this other kind of tool that I believe you're supposed to use, I guess, when applying those repair patches. Next up is the actual paddle itself, which comes in two halves. You just simply attach the two halves in the center. Looks like this one's just one set length. That doesn't seem to have multiple holes for different length options and different heights. And I do also want to take note that this is a metal paddle. This thing is not plastic, at least the long handle part of it. And last but not least, we have the paddleboard itself, which is neatly folded and wrapped up in this white sleeve. And on the paddleboard, there's actually two little fins already built in, not including the large one that is detachable. And these fins are currently covered by these little sleeves so that they don't get damaged in shipping. And I'd imagine you're supposed to put it away with these little sleeves on each of the fins every time you put it away. And there's also a strap around the middle of the paddleboard that you can use every time you package it up to help keep it in this very small, tight condition that it's in right here. So just from me unpacking it here, you can kind of get a sense of how small you can get this thing to be. Way more transportable than your traditional non-inflatable paddleboards. And there's a little plastic layer too that I'm just going to remove here. Make sure you remove that before you use it. I went for the red one, but these come in a couple different colors. They come in blue, and I believe the other color is green. So I have the paddleboard all laid out here, and I'm going to blow it up in just one moment, but I wanted to show you guys the little air valve area on the paddleboard that you actually plug the pump into. And it clearly lists on here that you're supposed to fill this up between 15 to 22 psi. And if you want to release the air when you're done, all you have to do is push down that button in the very middle, and that lets air out. When that button is not pushed down, air cannot get out. So when you see it open just like it is right here, it still has an airtight connection. No air is getting out. Now, if you want to just leave that valve open so that you can fold this thing up and keep on letting air out without holding the button down, you can push that button down and twist it while it's pushed down, and that'll lock it in place and let air keep coming out. The only reason I know that is because I've dealt with valves like this before, and I find them to work pretty well. So I'm now going to plug in the pump here. It looks like you just kind of push it into the hole and then twist it. And I'm going to time this for you guys to see how long this takes manually pumping it up. Okay, so all in all, this took about 5.5 minutes to get up to 15 psi. And let me tell you, out here in the summer heat, it actually felt more like 15. It would definitely be better if you had a second person to split the work with, but if you have to break a sweat, you have to break a sweat, I guess. It is a lot of effort with a manual pump like this one, but this is what it looks like fully blown up at 15 psi. You want to make sure you put that cap back in and twist it so that it's closed, and make sure you don't get any sand in there too if you bring this thing to the beach, because that can really mess with the little cap and the little valve in there. This thing's pretty big, and I gotta say, I like the design of it a lot. I like the color scheme and the texture look of it. I like the handle right there in the very middle. That's to carry it, which is going to make life pretty easy, although it is inflatable, so it's already not that heavy to start with. And it's very, very big. It's definitely a lot bigger than my rigid hard plastic paddleboard. This is what the bottom looks like here. It says Goosehill, and then there's a little warning sticker, and there's also the spot to clip in the big fin. You're going to want to make sure you bring that with you and clip it in. Otherwise, when you try to turn with the paddle or just go in a straight line, you're going to be just going in circles. Now, before I show you this in the water, there's one last thing I wanted to show you guys that'll save you a little bit of effort. You can use one of those electric air mattress pumps, just an electric air pump, a small one. You could probably use one of those high pressure air compressors too, but I have one of those little ones that you'd blow up an air mattress with in your car, so I'm going to show you guys how fast that is, and I'm showing you guys that right here, right now, with the timer, how fast I can fill this thing up using one of those little car air blowers. Now, if you had one of those air compressors that could fill this thing up, like an air compressor that could fill up a tire, and you're able to track the PSI, just make sure you stay within that recommended PSI window and do not go over it by any means. Now, with this air mattress little air pump, this thing cannot really do any PSI, really. This thing mainly just fills the bulk of the paddleboard, and then I do the rest. I get this thing filled up, and then it's pretty much at like no PSI. So I blow it all the way up to this point, and then I pull out the air blower, the air mattress blower, and I just get it up to 15 psi, which just takes another minute or two. But it does take a lot of the work out of it and makes it a little bit faster. And finally, the part that you've probably been waiting for, seeing this thing in action. If you're wondering how well a beginner can ride one of these, your question is answered. This right here, my dad, this is his first time ever riding a paddleboard. And as you can see, he's doing just fine. Balancing is pretty easy to figure out. He is wearing that little ankle cord, and there is a little clip to attach that cord to the top of the paddleboard. But his feet are standing well out of the water. His feet aren't getting wet. Like when the paddleboard tips from side to side, his feet might be getting a little wet from the paddle itself coming out of the water, but this thing stands a good height out of the water with him being around 150 pounds. And I've also used the paddleboard, and I really don't see many differences between this one and my rigid one as far as how well it handles and whatnot. This one has a very clear advantage, though, in how much it sits out of the water. When I use my rigid one, I believe the brand is Lifetime. It'll sit, if I kind of tip side to side a little bit on it, water will kind of fill up on the top of the paddleboard, and my feet will definitely get wet when I use that paddleboard, sometimes soaked. With this one, though, you stand very high out of the water, and your feet aren't, if you have good control, your feet aren't getting wet. You could probably even wear shoes if you were so inclined, but I wouldn't recommend it. Just to show you guys how well this one sits out of the water, this is two people on top of it, probably somewhere around 325 pounds, 330 pounds of weight right here. And we're still sitting out of the water and not getting wet. So this thing can hold a good deal of weight and still manage to float very, very well. So overall, I like this paddleboard a lot. At the price of $400, I think that's okay. I've definitely seen inflatable paddleboards go for a lot more than that. So, I mean, they got that going for them. I love the whole concept of it, though, the ability to just pack this thing up in a backpack and bring it from place to place. And let me tell you, you can wear it on your back as a backpack, but it's like a heavy, heavy backpack. Like if you were to bring this thing a mile, your back might be hurting afterwards, depending on how much you lift and how often you lift. But imagine it to be a very heavy backpack. You can put it on your back, and I did wear it on my back as a backpack to bring it to this spot right here. So I love the portability of it. I think that's great, and I think it's awesome to be able to bring it from place to place without having to need a truck. However, one drawback on this for me is I love to fish when I'm out on the water. And obviously, when you're using an inflatable paddleboard, fishing's probably not the best idea because your hook can easily pierce this thing when you're reeling it in if you reel it in a certain way. and then you're suddenly sinking out there on the water on a paddleboard that now has a hole in it. So highly advise against fishing on this thing. But yeah, overall I loved it. I thought it was easy to put away, easy to set up. The little air valve worked great. It didn't leak at all. Overall, I'd love it. And if I was to go and buy another paddleboard someday, I think I'd probably just go the inflatable route and I'd stop buying the rigid plastic ones, just because this just makes life a lot easier and it floats a lot better. So if you guys had any questions for me at all regarding this paddleboard, leave them in the comments down below, and I'll put a link to buy this one in the video description. And as always, guys, thank you for watching.